Hi everyone, my name is Wanda from Samisar and today we're going to make a Spiderman bracelet. Now this bracelet has 11 strings and one bass string, and I'm going to be using the flat alpha technique and the straight edge technique. Now to start our bracelet we're going to make a triangle shape start because I would like to show you how to do that. So I'm going to take my leading string, which is the red string that I extended, and I'm going to use that to make a backward forward knot over the strings together in one bunch. So a backward knot is a D and a forward knot is a 4. A capital D and the forward knot is a 4. So now I'm going to divide my strings into 3. So I'm going to have 5 on the left, 5 on the right, and one individual string in the middle because my strings are uneven. Yeah, an odd number of strings. Starting with the one on the right, I'm going to make a forward backward knot there. Like I told you, I'm using the straight edge technique. If you're not, you can just make your regular backward knot or your regular forward knot. And now we're going to make a backward knot on the next string, which is the single string we have that's in the middle. And to end this row, we're going to move to the left and make a backward forward knot. And for this start, I decided to I'm just going to make a shaped start, which means I'm going to take 2 strings out of the bunch on the right and 2 strings out of the bunch on the left. So 2 strings on that bunch. Yes, so I have 5 strings in the middle, 6 strings in each bunch, so that's 6 on the left and right combined. So starting with the left again, I'm going to make another backward forward knot. Then I'm going to make 5 forward knots, 1 knot on each string. If you don't want to make the shape start, you just want to make a plain triangle start, all you have to do is to remove 1 string from each bunch instead of removing 2 like I did. And now we're going to make a forward backward knot on the edge that's on the bunch that's on the right. Now to begin the next row, we're going to remove 1 string from the bunch on the left, so 1 string from the bunch on the right. Then we're going to start with our right side by making a forward backward knot. And now we're going to make 7 backward knots. So that's 1 knot over each string, that's 7 backward knots. Now we're going to make a backward forward knot on the left edge, left bunch. And now we're officially ending our triangle start and starting the beginning of the actual bracelet. So we're going to open that bunch and make a backward forward knot on the first string there. And then for the next 9 strings, we're going to be making forward knots. Thus, we're also going to remove 1 string from the bunch on the right. So 9 knots. We've done 1 so far, remaining 8. Now we're going to open that bunch, like I said before, and we'll make our last forward knot on that string. And to end this row, we're going to make a forward backward knot on the last string, which is the one on the right edge. Now that we've completed this row, for the next 25 rows, we're going to be making the exact same thing, but the only difference is that sometimes it will be backward knots instead of forward knots. The row I'm going to do now, starting with the forward backward knot, I'm going to make 9 backward knots, and then on the edge, on the left edge, I'm going to make a backward forward knot. And then I'm going to keep repeating the previous row and this row till I get to my 26th row. Mind you, we only started counting from the last row we did. So we are on our official second row now. And however long you are going to make your bracelet, make sure that it ends on the right side. Your string should be on the right edge. I would advise you to take a bracelet, your regular size bracelet. Mine is like 6.25 inches most of the time. Divide it by 3 and then make the first 1/3 of that bracelet. And I'm going to show you again how I do the first row. So our backward forward knot, 9 forward knots, and 1 forward backward knot on the right. This pattern is for beginners, but there's a previous tutorial I made. I will leave a link in the description and in the card. That one is much better because if you have not made an alpha bracelet before, this one has 3 colors and that one has 2, so that one's more beginner friendly. Now I'm just going to skip ahead till I'm ready to start the eyes. So now that we've completed the amount of plain rows we needed, so we're going to arrange our strings according to the pattern, starting from the left. I'm going to remove 3 strings, then leave 7 strings in the middle and 1 string on the edge. So we're getting started. Now with the one on the right, I'm going to make a forward knot. A forward backward knot. That'll be my first. Now I'm just going to switch to my black string, which I'll be showing you, and I'm not going to be tipping it down, just in case you're using a clipboard or you're pinning it down somewhere. It's much easier for you to learn this method. So I'm going to make the first half of my backward knot, then I'm going to take that red string and pass it through or like on top of the black knot I'm making, then complete it by making the second half of my backward knots. So I'm going to pass that tiny red string under the rest of the strings and pull it. So we've swapped our string. Now we have the black string as our leading string, and we're going to make 6 more knots, 6 more backward knots with that black string. And now since my previous red string was short, I'm going to have to bring a new string that I can use, which means I'm going to be introducing another string that will be red. And I'm going to start by making the first half of the backward knot. Now I want you to watch what I'm doing. I'm going to take that black string and pass it through my knots and under the remaining string and out of the way. Then I'm going to take that red string and I'm going to complete my backward knots, make the second half of the backward knot, and then pull. So this is the flat alpha technique, passing a string through, but we do not do this on the edges of bracelet, we just do it like in the middle or any other part. So I have 2 more knots, so 1 backward knot and 1 backward forward knot to make with my red string to complete this row. I'm going to be calling this our first row since we're starting with the eyes. Now for the second row, we're going to take 2 red knots starting from the left, 1 black knot, 5 white knots and 2 red knots on the right. So I'm going to try to separate them as much as I can. I don't think I did a good job, but let's just start. So starting with our red knot, we're going to make 1 backward forward knot, then a forward knot using our red string. Now we're going to swap back to our black string because we have 1 knot with the black string that we need to make. So make the first half of the forward knots this time, since we're making forward knots on this row. Then pass the red string through, but instead of passing it forward, we're going to pass it backward towards the left. And then take that string, take the black string and complete the second half of the forward knots. And the reason why we're taking this string towards the left instead of passing it in how we normally would, because we're introducing our white string now and we don't want them to get tangled, because if they get tangled your red string might show through your white knots and you don't want that. It would look messy. So now we're going to swap to our white string and we have 5 knots to make with white. So take the first string and make the first half of the forward knots. Now you're free to pass the black string through and under towards the right this time. And then complete your second half of the forward knots. Now we're with our white string. So proceed and make the next 4 forward knots with the white string. Now that we're done with that, we're going to bring our back string back in between the knots, the string we want to make a knot with, and then make the first half of the forward knots. Bring your white string down through, pass it towards the, remember now I'm going to pass this string towards the left this time. So the white string is going towards the left because we're going to bring in our red string, or you could do it this way. Hold those 2 strings, that's the bunch of strings, and the white strings up, pass the red string here and then push your white string towards the left. I hope that made sense. I hope so. So now we're going to make 2 knots with the red string, 1 forward knot and 1 forward backward knot. And this time you can make a normal change with your black string, since we're not going to be using that for any, so we're not going to make any more knots for this row. So now we're ending this row and we're going to begin the third row. Now we're going to arrange it. So we have 4 knots of red starting from the right, 1 knot, 5 knots of white, and then 1 knot of black on red and black on the left edge. So starting with the right, we're going to make 3 knots with the red string. That's 1 forward backward knot and 2 backward knots. Now we're going to swap to our black string because we have 1 knot with the black string, and we're not going to be swapping our strings in a normal way. We're going to do it like we did before. First half, pass that string towards the back this time, and then completes the color change by making the second half of the knot. Now for when we introduce our white string, because we have 5 rows of whites to do this time, we're just going to change our string normally this time. So we're going to make the first half of the forward knot, the backward knot, take the string, pass it through, under, pass it through, and towards the right side, towards the left side, sorry, and then complete the knot. Then make 4 more knots with that same white string. So now we're going to be swapping back to our black string. So we're going to take our black string and make the first half of the backward knot, pass our white string through and towards the back, complete the knot, then bring our white string, that's if it's hold it like it's a base string, and then pass our red knot through so we can use it, then pass the white knot towards the right and out of the way. Now before we start, since we're on the edge of the bracelet, we're now going to be using a flat alpha technique. So we're going to move our red leading string away and pass our black one over the base string so we can use the red string and make our last knot, which would be a backward forward knot. Because we're on the edge, we can't use the flat alpha technique. We're starting the fourth row, so we'll start by making a backward forward knot. Then we're going to switch back to our black string and make one forward knot with the black string. We're not going to be switching normally, so we're going to make the first half, pass the red string through and towards the back, which in this case is left now, and we're going to complete the knot. Now we're going to swap to our white string normally, and we're going to have 4 knots with the white string. So bring the white string through, make the first half of the forward knot, pass the string through normally towards the right, and then make the second half of the forward knot, then make 3 more forward knots using our white string. Now we're going to swap to our black string, and again we're not going to be swapping it normally. So we're going to make the first half with the black string, take the white string, pass it through, and then make the second half. Now we're going to bring our red string, so we're going to hook the white string and the base string together and then lift them, bring our white string, then pass the base string towards the left. So again, so that my strings are not tangled. Now make the first half of the forward knot, pass the black string through it normally and towards the right, under all the strings towards right, and then make the second half of the forward knot. Then make 2 more forward knots and 1 forward backward knot. Now to begin the next row, we're going to have 5 knots made with the red string, starting with a forward backward knot, then 4 backward knots. Then we're going to swap to our black string. We're not going to be swapping normally, so we'll make the first half of the knot, then pass our red string through it and towards the back, which is right in this case, so towards the back, then complete the knot. Now I'm going to bring the white string and we're going to swap normally this time. We have 3 knots with the white string, so swap to the right, pass the black string through and towards the left side, and then make the second half of the knot, and then make 2 more forward knots. Now I'm going to swap back to the black string, making the first half of the backward knot. We're not going to be swapping normally, so we're just going to make the first half, put the white string through, make the second half of the backward knot. Now pass this black string over the red base string towards the edge, towards the left. Now bring our red string and then put the white string towards the right side. And there we have no string tangling so far. Now make our knot with the red string. And now this is the last row for the first eye. We're going to make two knots with the red string. That's one backward forward knot and one forward knot, and then 3 knots with the black string, and then we make the remaining knots with the red string. Now we're going to bring our black string and make 3 forward knots with that string. Now we're going to swap to our red string and make 6 knots with that. So we're going to make 5 forward knots and 1 forward backward knot on the edge. For the next 2 rows, we're only going to be using the red string. So we're going to have a row of backward knots and a row of forward knots. We're going to move from left to right and we'll be back at the right again. I will just skip that part because I don't want this tutorial to be longer than it already is. So I'll get back to you when we're ready to start our second eye. What we're doing right now is like the bridge for the nose. So now we're going to start our second eye, taking the first 2 strings from the left, then the next 3 strings and the remaining. Starting from that side, we're going to make 1 backward forward backward knot, and then 5 backward knots with the red string. Now we're going to swap back to our black string and make 3 backward knots using that string. Now for the eye we're making, we're just going to be doing everything in reverse. So we started from, this is the last row we did for our previous eye. So we're just going to go from the last row to the first row, but for the second eye is going to be the first row. Again, if I'm not making sense, just look on the screen. I put the pattern there this time. So we're switching back to our red string to make a backward knot and a backward forward knot. Now for the next row, we're just going to arrange our strings according to the picture. So we have 1 string for black, 1, then 3 white, 1 black, and then 5 red. So taking our leading string, we're going to make the first backward forward knot with the red string. And then we're back to the time where we don't swap our strings normally. So bringing back the black string, because we have to do a white knot next, we're just going to make the first half, pass the string through and back towards the left, and then complete the second half of the knot. Now we're going to bring our white string and we're going to swap this one normally. So make the first half, take the string, pass it through and towards the right, and then complete the second half. And then make 2 more forward knots with the white string. Now bring back the black string and make 1 forward knot with that. For this part, we're not going to swap normally, so we're going to take it, pass it through, and then complete the second half of the knot. Now we're going to hold the white string and beige strings together, lift them up, and bring our red string to that side. And now we're going to pass our white string towards the left, sorry. Now with the red string, we're going to make 5 knots. That's going to be 4 forward knots and 1 forward. So for this next row now, we're going to start arranging our strings. We have 4 red, 4 white, and then 1 black and red on the edge. Starting with the right, we're going to make 1 forward backward knot, and then 3 backward knots with our red string. And now we're going to swap to our black string, and we're not going to be swapping like we normally would. So take the black string, make the first half of the backward knots, pass the string through and towards the right. Now make the second half of the backward knot. Now we're going to bring our white string back and we're going to swap to it normally, because we have 4 backward knots to make with the white string. Now we're going to swap to our black string, and because we only have to make 1 knot with this black string, we're not going to be swapping normally. So swap to the black, pass the white string through, and then complete the second half of the backward knot. Now lift those strings up, put the black string under the last string towards the left, then lift the white and the beige strings up, bring the red string there, and then now pass your white string towards the other side if you want to. Then make your forward knots with your red string on the last string that's on the left edge. Hopefully that did not complicate anything. If it did, you can just slow down the video and watch it again. Now I'm just going to arrange my string according to the pattern so it's easier for you and me. Now with the red string, we're going to have our forward knots on the left. And now we're not going to be swapping our string normally. We're going to bring in our black string and swap to that. Make the first half of the forward knot, pass the string through, and make the second half of the knot. Now I should change out my black string, but I'll change out on the other side. Why? I just feel like that side is going to be much better. Now we're going to swap to our white string. Now we're going to swap this one normally because we have 5 knots to make with the white string. and then complete the knot. And now I'm going to make 4 more forward knots with the white string. And now I'm going to swap back to our black string, which will not be swapping normally. To make the first half, pass the white string through and make the second half of the forward knot with the black string. And then lift all the strings up and bring the red string back, pass the white string to the left. And now we're going to make 3 knots with the red. That will be 2 forward knots and 1 forward backward knot, swapping normally. Now for this next row, we're going to start with 2 knots of red. That's one forward backward knot and 1 backward knot. And then 1 knot with the black string that is still very short, and I should change it, but let's see how far that string goes. So we're now going to swap normally. Make the first half, pass the red string through towards the right, and then make the second half of the black string. Now we're going to bring our white string, because we have 5 knots to make with the white string. We're going to be swapping to our white string like we normally would. And now we're going to swap back to that tiny black string that we have there. We're now going to swap this one normally. So take the white string, pass it through, and then make the second half of the knot, and then pull. And now we're going to bring our red string, sorry. So we're lifting all the strings up to bring our red string back, and then passing our white string to the right, and then the first half of the knot. Take the black string, pass it through, under, and towards the left, and then make the second half of the knot. And for the last knot of this row, we're going to make a backward forward knot. And now we're on our last row for the eye. Starting this row, we're going to make 3 knots with the red string, then 7 knots with the black string. So getting started, we're going to make another backward forward knot, then 2 forward knots with the red string. And I am finally going to change out my string. So I'm going to introduce my new black string. If your string isn't new, you can just keep using it. Mine is. And I'm going to make 7 forward knots with this black string. And now we're going to swap back to our red string. and make the last knot there the forward backward knot. And remember, we're not going to be using a flat alpha technique for this swap because it is on the edge of the bracelet. And now we're just going to do what we did previously. We're going to be making plain rows with the red string. So we're going to make rows of backward forward knots with our red string. We're going to make the same amount we made before. So if you made 20 before, you make 20 now. I made 25 before, so I'm going to make 25 rows now. And if I realize that's not where it's, if I measure it around my hand and I realize that's not where it is, I might add one extra row. But just know that for this bracelet, I'm going to be ending it, well, I'm going to be ending this row on the left side. So my string will be on the left side when I'm done. There's something I forgot to mention. When you divide your measurements of your wrist or your bracelet you want by 3, each part of this bracelet is actually divided into 3. The beginning part, the eyes, and then the part we're making now. So it should be the same measurement you use in order to get the size of your wrist or your desired measurement. And now for the triangle end, we're not going to be making it shaped, it's just going to be a triangle. But if you want to make your shape, I'll show you what to do. So I'm going to put 2 strings into a bunch on each side. Starting with the one on the left, I'm going to make a backward forward knot over that knot. And then for the next 7 strings, we're going to be making 1 forward knot over each. So we're going to make 7 knots, 1 on each individual string we have. And now we're going to go to the right side and make a forward backward knot over those 2 strings together. And for this next row now, we're going to add 1 string to each bunch. So we have 3 strings in each bunch, both on the right, and 3 strings in the bunch on the left too. And 5 strings in the middle. So starting again, we're going to make another forward backward knot. Then on to the 5 strings, we're going to make 1 knot on each. So 5 backward knots each. On each, sorry. Now for this one here, we're going to make a backward forward knot. Now if you would like to make a shape start, for this next row, add 2 strings each to the bunch. So you add 2 strings each to the bunch. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be adding 1 string to each bunch. And then I'll be repeating that. Same backward forward knot again. And then since I have 3 strings, and then we'll just make our forward knots on those 3 strings. And now we're going to make a forward backward knot on the last bunch on the right. And now this is our last row. We're just going to take those, put 1 string in each bunch again, and then we'll start with our forward backward knot on the right, then 1 backward knot on the string in the middle, forward knots. Now this is what I'm going to do like we did at the beginning. I'm going to make a forward backward knot over all these strings together just to make sure it has a nice triangle end. This is not compulsory, I just like to do it. Now I'm going to divide my strings into 3. So that will be 4 strings in each. 4 strings in each, yeah. And I'm going to make a braided tie, which means I'm going to pass the one on the left in the middle, right to the middle, and do it again, left to the middle and the right to the middle. Now I'm just going to loosen this so I can show you how to make a tighter braid. So hold each in your hands and then make the same thing, left, middle, right, middle, left, middle, right, middle, and make it as tight as you want. And then I'm going to end it off with a knot or a box, or a forward knot, sorry. And everybody was asking me what I do. I just cut my strings as close to the end of them as possible. I don't do anything like adding nail polish or glue, though you can do that. I just don't like how it feels when I add those things to the bracelet. So I just cut my strings and that is actually all. Then I trim off the ties and then I wear it. And that's all for this tutorial. Thank you for watching. I'll leave a link to the white, this is the beginner bracelet, Spider-Man bracelet. And thank you. Bye.